Imagine the most powerful empire in human history, an empire so vast the sun can't escape it, suddenly realizing something terrifying. It might run out of fuel, not in 50 years, not eventually, but in the middle of a war, because the thing that powered Britain's ships was changing. And that shift, quiet, technical, almost boring on paper, would trigger invasions, coups, betrayals, and the birth of a country designed less like a nation and more like a container for petroleum. If you look at a world map from the summer of 1914, the British Empire dominates like a painted god. A quarter of the earth is shaded in British pink. The sea lanes belong to London. The ports answer to the crown. From the outside, Britain looks untouchable, but inside the Admiralty, behind the polished brass and oak-paneled confidence, there was panic. Not panic about Germany's armies, not panic about Russian hordes, not panic about trenches, a more primitive fear, a fear older than any empire, the fear of the fire going out. Because a fleet, no matter how mighty, is just floating metal if it can't feed its engines. For 100 years, Britain's power was built on one substance: coal. Britain wasn't just a nation, it was a coal machine. The damp valleys of Wales produced coal so valuable it might as well have been a strategic weapon. Every coaling station, from Gibraltar to Singapore, was stacked with it like a fortress stockpiling ammunition. And as long as ships ran on coal, Britain controlled the bloodstream of global power. Coal was domestic. Coal was reliable. Coal was British. Then science lit a match under the old world. In 1912, Winston Churchill, young, hungry, and aggressive, stood at the helm of the Royal Navy. Churchill looked at the future and made a decision that was genius in engineering and terrifying in geopolitics. He decided to switch the Royal Navy from coal to oil. On paper, it was perfection. Oil burned hotter, ships moved faster, oil burned cleaner. Less smoke, less visibility. Oil could be pumped. No armies of exhausted stokers shoveling coal while shells fell overhead. Oil meant refueling faster, sometimes even at sea. So Churchill ordered the Queen Elizabeth-class dreadnoughts, monsters of steel, built to run on oil alone. Militarily, brilliant; strategically, a nightmare because Britain had coal but Britain did not have oil. Coal came from British ground. Oil came from elsewhere. No Welsh valley gave it. No Scottish highland produced it. No English shire could supply it. By switching fuels, Churchill had traded self-sufficiency for dependence. Dependence on a substance that had to be shipped across oceans, guarded through war zones, protected from enemies. In that moment, the British Empire realized something. It owned the sea, but not the oil. And if oil became the new blood of war, then whoever controlled oil would control the future, which meant Britain had to secure it, not politely, not slowly, but permanently. To understand how Britain ended up invading a land that wasn't even a country yet, we have to go back to one man, William Knox D'Arcy. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a prime minister, he wasn't a hero, he was a gambler, a man who made his fortune in Australian gold and returned to London to live like a gentleman, and discovered that comfort is its own kind of prison. Then he heard a rumor. French geologists whispered about oil seepages in Persia, modern Iran, and at the time that sounded insane. Oil came from Pennsylvania. Oil came from Russia's Baku fields. The Middle East was not oil. It was desert, bandits, disease, and distance. But D'Arcy wanted the next big score, so he went straight to the Shah. In 1901, D'Arcy secured a concession so large it reads like fantasy. Exclusive rights to search for oil in a region larger than France, 60 years. The Shah received money up front and a promise of future profit. D'Arcy received a lottery ticket to the future. And for 7 years, that ticket looked like a curse. D'Arcy hired a tough, self-taught engineer, George Reynolds. Reynolds dragged equipment through the Zagros Mountains like a man trying to move a factory by hand. The men faced typhoid, smallpox, cholera. The heat climbed toward 120 degrees. Tribes demanded bribes to pass. Supplies vanished. Tools broke. Morale cracked. Back in London, Darcy's fortune bled away. He mortgaged property. He borrowed money. He approached anyone who might bankroll the dream. Even the Admiralty watched but didn't pay. And by 1908, the syndicate panicked. They sent a telegram to Persia: stop drilling, pack up, come home. The dream was dead. Then Reynolds did something that changed the modern world. Reynolds ignored the order. He looked at the rock, the pressure, the signs, and told his men, one more week. It was stubbornness. It was rebellion. It was desperation. And on May 26, 1908, the earth answered. A rumble became a roar. And then a black fountain erupted into the sky. Crude oil 50 feet high, soaking the men, the sand, and history itself. They had struck one of the greatest oil finds of the era. Overnight, everything changed. Darcy's operation transformed into a company, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Later, the world would know it by two letters, BP. They built pipelines from the mountains to the Persian Gulf. They constructed a massive refinery at Abadan, on swampy ground near the Shat al-Arab waterway. Suddenly, the Persian Gulf was no longer a backwater. It became a gas station for empire. But the refinery's location created a new danger, because Abadan sat near a border, and borders mean enemies. The only route to export Persian oil was through a river, the Shat al-Arab. To one side, Persia. To the other, Ottoman territory, including Basra. The Ottomans watched British pipelines creep toward their doorstep. They watched gunboats patrol the water. And they understood something the British also understood. Geology does not respect borders. If oil existed in Persia, it likely extended underground into Ottoman provinces, Basra, Baghdad, Mosul. And that meant the future might belong to whoever controlled Mesopotamia. Churchill didn't trust private business to fuel the Royal Navy. Companies can fail. Companies can sell to rivals. Companies can be bought. So in the summer of 1914, just weeks before the world exploded, Churchill did something unprecedented. He convinced Parliament to buy a controlling stake in Anglo-Persian oil, 51%. That meant something crucial. When war came, this wasn't just a company. It was the British state. Its profits were national profits. Its security was national security. And suddenly, oil infrastructure wasn't commerce. It was a military target. When Europe's alliances began to collapse after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, British planners saw Germany. But their eyes kept drifting to Mesopotamia. The Ottoman Empire hadn't entered the war yet, but Britain feared they would drift toward Germany, especially with a German-backed railway stretching from Berlin toward Baghdad. If the Ottomans joined Germany, they could cut the pipeline, shell the refinery, choke the Royal Navy's fuel. So Britain prepared an attack before formally declaring war on the Ottomans. A brigade of the Indian Army was ordered into position in the Persian Gulf. This was not about defending India. This was corporate security with bayonets. And then, once Britain declared war on November 5, 1914, the next day the guns opened fire. The invasion began at the mouth of the Shat al-Arab. British and Indian troops came ashore expecting a minor campaign: secure the river, protect the refinery, hold Basra, then sit tight. And at first it worked. Ottoman forces were weak, distant from Baghdad, poorly supplied. Basra fell quickly, and the British commander entered with a proclamation: "We come not as conquerors but as liberators." History would recycle that line many times. With Basra secured, Abadan was safe. The pipeline flowed. The Navy had its fuel. Mission accomplished. A prudent empire would stop there, but oil makes empires hungry. London looked at the map again. Yes, Basra was taken. But what if the Ottomans counterattacked? What if the pipeline was threatened again? And then came the whispers: Mosul, a northern city near Kurdistan, rumored to sit on oceans of oil. A shadowy consortium already existed to explore it: the Turkish Petroleum Company. And hovering behind it all was an Armenian dealmaker known as Mr. 5%, Kalaust Gulbenkian, because he always kept a peace. The logic became clear. Basra was the exit. Mosul was the source. So the invasion's purpose changed. From defense to conquest. The push north fell to General Charles Townshend, ambitious, eccentric, hungry for glory. He drove his army up the Tigris River through a landscape built to break men. Dust that choked lungs, heat that cooked brains, flies that drove soldiers half-mad, supply lines stretched thin. River steamers became lifelines. The Ottomans retreated, but not in defeat. They retreated to pull the British deeper. Amara fell. Kut fell. London celebrated, but the soldiers were dying of sickness and exhaustion. Still, the prize ahead was too tempting. Baghdad, the legendary city, and beyond it, the oil. In late 1915, the British tried a final dash for Baghdad. They met the main Ottoman army near Ctesiphon. It was slaughter. The Ottomans were dug in deep. Fresh reinforcements, strong artillery. Townshend threw his men at trenches again and again. A third of his army fell in a single day. Baghdad was impossible, so he retreated to Kut al-Amara and dug in, believing relief would come quickly. It didn't. Kut became a cage. The Ottomans surrounded Kut completely. Inside, 13,000 British and Indian troops plus civilians trapped. Food vanished. Disease spread. Rations shrank. Relief forces tried to break through and were massacred. Tens of thousands died outside Kut trying to save those inside. Inside Kut, men ate horses, then mules, then nothing. Townshend sent desperate messages. He offered the Ottoman commander £1,000,000 in gold. The Ottoman commander refused. Britain couldn't buy its way out. On April 29, 1916, Kut surrendered. A humiliating collapse for the empire, and the prisoners were marched into death. Kut should have ended the campaign. It proved Mesopotamia was a trap. It proved the cost was insane. But Britain couldn't walk away. Because by now, Britain didn't just need oil. Britain had merged its government with an oil company. The empire's pride was damaged. Its fuel supply was vulnerable. And London decided on revenge. They would double down. A new commander arrived, Frederick Maud, methodical, cold, industrial. He didn't rush. He built railways, brought guns, used planes, rebuilt the campaign as a machine. Kut was retaken, and in March 1917, British troops entered Baghdad. Again they read the proclamation, "We come not as conquerors but as liberators." But the war wasn't over, because Baghdad wasn't the true prize. Mosul was. By 1918, everyone could sense the war ending, and Britain knew a brutal truth of diplomacy. When peace is signed, you only keep what you occupy. So Britain looked north. Mosul still sat outside their grasp, and beneath Mosul the oil, which sets up the next act of the story, the moment Britain would take land after the war was officially over. A diplomatic theft, a heist completed in peacetime. October 30th, 1918. On the deck of the British battleship HMS Agamemnon, anchored off the Greek island of Lemnos, Ottoman representatives signed the Armistice of Mudros. The Great War in the Middle East was officially over. The guns were supposed to fall silent. The killing was supposed to stop. The lines on the map were supposed to freeze forever. But maps are meaningless when oil is involved. At the exact moment the armistice was signed, British forces in Mesopotamia were positioned just south of a single city, Mosul. They had not taken it. They were miles away. The Ottoman flag still flew over its citadel. The Ottoman governor was still in control. According to international law, Mosul was Ottoman territory. But international law was about to meet geology. Back in London, Prime Minister David Lloyd George and his cabinet were staring at a classified geological report. It confirmed what British planners had suspected for years. Mosul was sitting on vast reservoirs of crude oil. Not speculation, not rumor, confirmed reserves, and suddenly stopping at Baghdad became unacceptable. If Britain obeyed the armistice, Mosul might remain Turkish, or worse, it might fall into French hands. So the British government made a decision that violated the spirit and the letter of peace. They ordered the army to keep marching. General William Marshall, the British commander on the ground, received his orders. Ignore the armistice. Advance on Mosul. Occupy the city. British troops arrived at Mosul's gates days after the war was officially over. The Ottoman commander Ali Ihsan Pasha rode out in protest. He waved the armistice text. He cited international law. He demanded the British halt. Marshall ignored him. He delivered an ultimatum: withdraw or be destroyed. The Ottomans, defeated, exhausted, abandoned by Istanbul, had no choice. They withdrew. Mosul fell, not in war, but in peace. This was the heist completed. Britain now controlled all three pillars of Mesopotamia. Basra in the south, ports and pipelines; Baghdad in the center, administration and power; Mosul in the north. Oil, but conquest is only half the problem. Now Britain had to keep it. And that meant diplomacy, dangerous diplomacy, because Britain had already promised Mosul to someone else. In 1916, while the war still raged, two diplomats made one of the most infamous deals in modern history. Mark Sykes of Britain, François-Georges Picot of France. Behind closed doors, they carved the Ottoman Empire into zones of influence. This was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and in that agreement, Mosul belonged to France. At the time, Britain didn't care. But by 1918, Mosul wasn't just land. It was oil, and Britain needed it back. December 1918, French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau arrived in London. He met Lloyd George privately. No aides, no minutes, no witnesses. Lloyd George asked a simple question: "What do you want?" Clemenceau answered without hesitation: "Syria." Britain had the power to grant it, and Lloyd George made the offer. Britain would hand Syria to France. They would betray the Arab forces who had fought alongside Lawrence of Arabia. They would abandon Damascus. In exchange, Britain would keep Mosul. Clemenceau agreed. With a handshake and a cup of tea, millions of lives were traded. Syria for oil. In 1920, the deal was formalized at the San Remo Conference. The League of Nations granted Britain the mandate over Mesopotamia. On paper, it was legal. In reality, it was colonialism rebranded. Britain now administered the territory. But administration was never the goal. Control was. Britain now faced a logistical problem. Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul were not a nation. They were three unrelated Ottoman provinces. Basra, Shiite, trade-focused, Gulf-oriented; Baghdad, Sunni, cosmopolitan, administrative; Mosul, Kurdish, mountainous, oil-rich. There was no shared identity. But Britain needed unity, not for the people, for the oil. So Britain did something extraordinary. They invented a country. They called it Iraq. The borders of Iraq were not drawn along ethnic lines, not religious lines, not cultural lines. They were drawn to protect. Oil fields in the north, refineries in the south, pipelines in between. Kurds were included because oil lay beneath their land. Shiites were included because ports were essential. It was a forced marriage, and it would never be stable. During the war, Britain promised independence. Posters plastered Baghdad's walls. Speeches spoke of liberation. But after the war, Iraqis realized the truth. They hadn't been freed. They'd been transferred from Ottoman rule to British rule. And in 1920, Iraq exploded. The revolt began in the mid-Euphrates. Shiite clerics issued fatwas against British occupation. Tribes mobilized. Kurds rose in the north. British garrisons were attacked. Supply lines cut. Entire units wiped out. The Manchester Regiment was annihilated at Manchester Hill. Britain faced a full-scale uprising. Britain was exhausted. The public was tired of war. The Treasury was bleeding money. So Winston Churchill, now Secretary of State for War and Air, proposed a solution: air control. Instead of armies, bombers. Villages that resisted were warned, then bombed, homes destroyed, livestock killed, terror from above. It worked. The revolt collapsed. The oil was safe. Britain knew overt rule couldn't last. They needed a local face, a king. They chose Faisal, son of the Sharif of Mecca, hero of the Arab Revolt, recently expelled from Syria by the French. He had never been to Iraq. That didn't matter. In 1921, Britain staged a referendum, 96% approval, Faisal was crowned king of Iraq. Britain wrote the constitution. Britain designed the flag. British advisors held real power, and the oil stayed British. In 1925, Iraq signed the final concession. The Iraq Petroleum Company received exclusive drilling rights for 75 years. Iraq received royalties. No ownership, no control. The company's shareholders told the real story. British interests shell France America, and Gulbenkian's famous 5% oil flowed. Empires profited. Iraq had been born in original sin, a state designed for extraction, its divisions frozen into place, its politics poisoned. When the monarchy fell in 1958, the structure remained. When Saddam rose, he inherited it. When the U.S. invaded in 2003, they marched the same ground, fought the same cities, faced the same fractures. In Baghdad lies Northgate War Cemetery. Thousands of British and Indian soldiers rest there. They died believing they served king and country, but history tells the truth. They died for pipelines. They died for refineries. They died so an empire could change fuel. The invasion of 1914 was the world's first oil war, a corporate raid disguised as empire. It turned the Middle East into the fuel tank of the world and condemned its people to a century of intervention. The empire is gone, but the borders remain, and the oil still flows. King Faisal ruled a country that did not yet believe it existed. He was a foreigner crowned by foreigners, ruling a population stitched together by imperial decree. The tribes did not trust him. The clerics doubted him. The Kurds rejected him, and the British never truly left him alone. Behind every royal decree stood a British advisor. Behind every ministry sat a British consultant. Behind every major decision loomed British oil interests. Iraq was independent in name only, and everyone knew it. The Iraqi state was not designed to serve its people. It was designed to collect rent. Oil money flowed not into schools or hospitals, but into patronage, military control, political loyalty. The government didn't need taxes from citizens. And when a state doesn't need its people, it doesn't listen to them. This single fact would shape Iraq's future more than any war. Without public legitimacy, power shifted to the only institution capable of holding the country together by force. The army. Officers became kingmakers. Coups became routine. Politics moved from parliament to barracks. By the 1930s and 40s, Iraq had become a revolving door of strongmen, all inheriting the same brittle system designed decades earlier for oil security. After World War II, the British Empire weakened, but the oil did not lose importance. It gained it. As the Cold War began, Iraq became a chess piece between empires. The British influence faded. The Americans stepped in. Same logic, same priorities, different accent. Oil was now the fuel not just of ships, but of global ideology. In 1958, the illusion finally shattered. The Iraqi monarchy was overthrown in a violent coup. The king was killed. The royal family was executed. Crowds dragged bodies through the streets. Britain was shocked but not surprised. The system they built had finally collapsed under its own contradictions, but the structure remained. New leaders promised change. They spoke of sovereignty, of national pride, of reclaiming resources. Oil became the symbol of independence, and whoever controlled oil controlled the state. Into this system stepped men who understood its brutal logic. One of them was Saddam Hussein. He didn't invent Iraq's problems. He inherited them. A centralized state, oil-funded power, military dominance, ethnic division. He simply perfected the machine the British had built. Oil financed Saddam's wars. Oil attracted foreign intervention. Oil made Iraq powerful and vulnerable. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, it wasn't madness. It was oil logic taken to its extreme, and the world responded exactly as it always had, with force. When American and British forces invaded Iraq in 2003, history looped. The same rivers, the same cities, the same divisions, Baghdad, Basra, Mosul. Once again, foreign armies promised liberation. Once again, oil lay beneath the strategy. Once again, a fragile state collapsed. The borders drawn for pipelines never healed. Kurds sought independence. Sectarian violence exploded. Power fractured. The state dissolved. Not because Iraq failed, but because Iraq was never built to succeed. Every crisis in Iraq carries the ghost of 1914, the invasion, the pipeline, the refinery, the moment coal gave way to oil. A single decision made in London reshaped a region forever. The First Oil War was not a moment. It was a template. Empires learned that controlling energy meant controlling destiny, and once that lesson was learned, it was never forgotten. The British Empire vanished. The mandates ended, the flags changed, but oil remained. And so did the consequences: millions displaced, millions dead, a century of instability, all traceable to a single choice: speed over security. Oil over coal, empire over people. Iraq was not born from revolution. It was born from a spreadsheet. It was not shaped by its people. It was shaped by pipelines. And as long as oil remains central to global power, the legacy of that first invasion will never truly fade. The British Empire believed oil would save it. Instead, oil outlived it. And Iraq paid the price. This is not ancient history. It is living history, flowing history, still burning beneath the sand.